Hello and welcome to our masterclass. We are here today to talk about budget. Our masterclass is called Use It or Lose It, Maximising Your Budget. My name is Amber. I am Head of Client Services here at Finally, and I am here with Roxanna.
Hi everyone, I'm Roxanna. I'm one of the project managers at Finally.
We are running this session because as account managers and as project managers, we are the ones that deal most frequently and most heavily with other marketing managers and other marketing teams on their maximising and using their budgets, whether it be projects and retainers. We are the people that kind of help them the most. So we are hopefully going to give you as many hints and tips and information as we possibly can. So one of the biggest challenges that marketing managers face, and a problem that we often come across as well, is the misalignment of budget and kind of how budgets can be misunderstood, mutually misunderstood. And whether it be the budget is misaligned to expectations at the time or whether expectations change halfway along. So one of the most common problems that marketing managers and agencies alike will face is the misalignment and the misunderstanding, I think, around what constitutes as a quick job, and the understanding that something that is perceived as a quick job externally, internally might not be a quick job at all. And that kind of, the myth surrounding that will always add to a scope creep, because with quick jobs that are not necessarily quick comes rounds of amends, and with rounds of amends comes an increase in budget. And I think that is something that we are continually being faced with, and we are kind of constantly educating on to manage those expectations.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of common misconception around quick jobs and how long they actually take. So something that might be perceived as a quick sort of 5-minute job could be something that takes an hour, 2 hours, and eventually will lead to more budget being eaten.
Yeah, and I think when you're working with an agency as well, there's kind of a misconception about how that job gets briefed into us. I think here at Finally we operate a pod system, so we have account managers, we have project managers who manage the studio, and as I say, what might be perceived as a quick job of can you just quickly fix that graphic, to us it's not a quick job because we take quite a lot of pride in the work that we do. But yeah, I think certain graphics, for example, I think usually is a big one that we get of can you just change the colour to green? Yeah, it's really not a quick job. Yeah, and I think the more changes that are done, the more amends that are made, the more back and forth. Every single time a change comes in or a change request is made, it's budget that's being used. It's not, we don't just do those amends out of the goodness of our heart. Of course, we do everything out of the goodness of our heart, but I think that there is a lot of budget gets eaten up quite quickly by constant rounds of amends. Yeah. Which is always also quite hard to book into the studio as well. Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to the brief as well. So even no matter how big a job is, fully understanding what is exactly required within that particular task is so important, because even if you've got a quick job that you're going to be changing graphics just to a different colour, you need to understand how many rounds of amends you're going to have, or how many times it's going to be reviewed, or how many times it's going to come back. So something that might be considered quite small could inadvertently end up quite big. Yeah, without intention.
Yeah, and I think if there isn't an accurate enough brief, or there isn't an accurate enough understanding of what a job is right from the beginning, we don't have that clarity either. Or if you're doing the work yourself as a marketing manager, if you don't have the clarity of what the brief is up front, when you're moving along at each stage of the project, you're going to come up against, I wasn't sure what that was meant to be, or I wasn't sure what I was meant to be doing at that point, or that's changed and now it's not meant to be that way. And if you're not sure of what the brief is right at the beginning, you're just setting yourself up for multiple changes and multiple kind of budget changes, if you like, because of scope creep, which is really what we're talking about. Yeah. I think scope creep in itself is a wider topic. It's not just about rounds of amends or, as I say, misalignment on what is considered a quick job, which isn't always a quick job. I think scope creep is possibly the biggest problem we face as a client services team. Yeah. I think from an account manager's point of view, we get excited with our clients, we get excited with our marketing teams because they want to do all the things, and we sort of half just say yes and go, we'll sort that out. But much to the project manager's dismay, because we come to them and say, we have all this new stuff that we want to do, and they have to try and work it out with the current allocated budget. How do you guys kind of manage scope creep? How does it feel to be given scope that's creeping and trying to keep that in budget?
Horrifying. No, I think that I get it from the account manager's perspective though, because you want to, obviously your main aim is to keep the client happy. So immediately the answer is yes, we can include it perhaps, but from a project manager's perspective, trying to just have a look at what is in scope, what are the priorities for the year, is it something that's going to really be detrimental to the cause of the campaign or the results of the campaign? If it isn't, then does it warrant actually that project going out of budget to satisfy the client's requirements in that instance? So I think looking at it a little bit holistically and understanding, is it something that we need to do or is it something that we want to do but isn't actually 100% necessary, is really important.
Yeah, so I think understanding and knowing exactly what your goals and objectives are and ensuring that any change that you want to make or any addition that you want to make, is it 100% aligned with the strategy that you set at the beginning? If it is, wonderful, find a way to make it work, see if there's any other priorities that could be deprioritised and moved down, and make sure that whatever it is you're doing is always in line with your strategy, will probably be the key takeaway on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've talked about misalignment and kind of a lack of clarity maybe around scope creep, the myth around how a job can be considered quick, or if we would say it's not necessarily a quick job, and the rounds of amends that can cause scope creep and budget increases. There is also, I think, the fear around using it or losing it, obviously the title of our masterclass. So having a budget allocated, having that accurate brief so that we know that that budget is sound and that it is going to cover the kind of the total run of the project. And I think now we're going to talk about kind of ways to mitigate some of those problems that are faced. So one of the biggest and best ways to mitigate any challenges around budgets or kind of budget scope creep is accurate forecasting and planning. And from an account manager perspective, or from like a client services side of things, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would ever give, or two biggest pieces of advice I would ever give, is having a really accurate brief. We touched on that when we first started talking about budget challenges, is having a very, very clear brief, which is kind of signed off with all key stakeholders or key team members, and having a statement of work that takes that brief and lists out what the deliverables are, what the timeframes are, who is in charge of what, and it kind of just answers all the questions that everybody would need to have in front of them, so that there can never be a question of what was included. And if there is, it's okay. Anticipating those change requests quickly and early, anticipating what impact that might have and any risks that there might be associated with that. They would be my two biggest pieces of advice. And I think from a project management point of view, it's same thing, forecasting, planning, but very much with the kind of the costing element of it.
So from a project management point of view, having a costing sheet in place is super important. I think it allows the teams to take a little bit of responsibility as well and ownership of their own hours as to how long they think is going to take a task for them to complete. I think that also links to what the project manager will then proceed to do and scope a project. And work out how long something's going to take and does it fit within the budget. I think also splitting down the budget into separate pots is super important. Having a dedicated pot of money for a dedicated specific thing, and accounting for any sort of ad hoc changes that will come up throughout the project cycle.
Yeah, I think having like a really open line of communication as well between the team or between any external stakeholders or anything like that. As I say, having a transparent and honest conversation as and when things crop up. Reporting on successes is really important, but also understanding if a change needs to come in or if something's not happening in the way you thought it was going to. If things are done quicker, amazing, but if things are taking longer, for whatever reason, that needs to be kind of identified quite quickly.
Absolutely.
The quicker you kind of jump in on that and the quicker you understand what needs to change and why, the better for kind of budget purposes. Exactly.
Yeah, agreed. I think that there's always going to be an area of the project or the budget that isn't going to go to plan. I think that's absolutely normal, but having a plan for when things don't go to plan is also a great tip as well. So having a little pot of money or contingency plan when things do change, a buffer, yes, love to call it a buffer, but when things don't go to plan, and having a backup.
Yeah. Also linked to forecasting and planning as well is having a really defined list of what your must-haves are, what your should-haves are, but also what your could-haves are. So having a wish list of things that are not currently in the initial scoping, but they are there, so that should budget become available or should things be done quicker and there's that extra pot of money, that contingency plan that you talked about, there is a wish list available that actually you think, oh, okay, we've got a bonus here, a little Brucey bonus of things that we can incorporate into this project just to add kind of additional value.
Yeah. I think having that ad hoc pot of money and having a contingency plan also allows you to get through your wish list quite nicely, and not having to get to the end of a project and rush back through to start and think, where could we spend our remaining pots of nice little chunks of money. I think there's a good plan in place from the wish list plan that's been agreed at the start of a project that's around and available for you to dip and dive into when you get round to it at the end of the project.
Yeah, and kind of helps to smooth over that fear of, if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it, because actually there's ways that you can use it should you not use up all of your budget. And actually if you've done everything and there is no more budget available, you've got a wish list even for future planning, for future projects.
Exactly.
So, I mean, following on from our discussion about that wish list log, so the kind of the project work that you could have should the budget be available for it, I think a really important point to make on that is looping back to what we said before about prioritising the right activities. And if it's not aligned with your goals and with your objectives, should you really be doing it? And a wish list can always be sort of fed into as you go along, and you can identify any gaps that have come up as you're going along. It might be that, we should have considered this, we could have considered this, and it goes onto your wish list as long as it's aligned with your goal. But I think that alignment with really what is it that you're trying to achieve, and is this particular activity or asset going to help me get there? That has to be front of mind no matter what list this activity is on. Is it on your must-haves, your should-haves, or your could-haves?
Is it important?
Absolutely,
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that without prioritising those areas of where you're going to allocate your budget leads to where you run into overrun at the end of the project, because you don't have a list of things that you can relook at and prioritise again.
Yeah. So from an account management point of view, budget overruns are really common, and I think it mostly comes around from exactly what you said before, with the identifying the tasks that need to be done and allocating it correctly and having a pot of money for it. I think problems will always arise when there's multiple stakeholders, when it's not quite clear who is in charge of what, who is accountable or responsible for certain things. Because when there's multiple stakeholders feeding in and everybody has a different idea and everybody wants something slightly different, everyone sees things in a slightly different way, if it's not clear who's taking ownership over that, the additions, the ideas, the requests, anything like that will always have a massive impact on the budget, because it's not coming from one person. And I think from a project manager point of view, I mean, it's really important to have RACI reports, right? Yeah,
exactly. I think knowing that the team are aware of who is accountable for what element of the project is super important. I think that ties in quite nicely with understanding overrunning of budget, essentially, because people know exactly what they're responsible for and what areas don't sit with them. They know that another team member's got a handle on it. I think that another good tool for managing overrun is having a burn down report and having a track or a log of where budget has been spent, where you are tracking against, what your total budget was, and areas where you think that you can probably pull budget back a little bit from, and having a little bit of a holistic view on the financials by having a report.
Which is, I mean, that comes back to what we said about having that really open and transparent communication line where those burn down reports are constantly reviewed, all the stakeholders are kind of brought into it, but there is someone who has the last word as to, okay, we're at this point in our burn down, we're at this point in the project, what's next, where does the pot of money get allocated? There is someone that takes ownership over that and makes that final decision, which makes it so much easier to, if you have to change direction, at least there is one person in charge of it, but the budget is kind of essentially managed much more effectively and much more efficiently.
Exactly, yeah. And I think having, like we touched on previously, things may not go to plan, and that's absolutely normal, but having that pot of money there for just in case something crops up or happens, so that you're trying to avoid overrunning of your budget and overburning of your budget quickly, is always super helpful.
And brief. Like, how many times do we keep coming back to briefs? Like, we are going to provide a brief, one of the briefs that we use in a link in our description, so that you guys can use that. But I mean, we put such a huge importance on having briefing calls and kick-off calls with the clients and the kind of the marketing teams that we work with, to properly document what it is you're doing, and having those RACIs and having the burn reports and having the brief that's always gone back to, and with there's constant check-ins. Sort of the more you communicate, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And be flexible, right? I mean, be ready for the changes, be ready for the additions, but be flexible and know that not everything goes perfectly to plan all the time. But having that flexibility means that you have the ability and the confidence to move with the project. But also it means that you need to remove that fear of not having budget for certain things. Sometimes ideation doesn't have a budget, it doesn't have a timeline. You can't, sometimes the best ideas come to us in the shower, or we'll be walking the dog and all of a sudden something will click, and that's part of it. That's part of the beauty of some of the creative projects that get worked on, and probably one of the beauties of marketing is that it's not always perfect and we can come up with ideas whenever we want to, but there isn't always a budget for that, and that's okay. I mean, we have development projects, don't we, internally, where we kind of allocate non-build time to coming up with new ideas, and that's kind of the fun of it. Yeah,
exactly, and it's such an important part of the process. It's the massive starter or the beginning chunk of a project before it even kicks off, so having that part is super important.
It's being okay with adding value without the fear of what the repercussions of that value would be. Like, you can either implement it straight away if it's a great idea and it's aligned, or if it's not right now, there's no reason to say that it can't be used in the future, but it's okay to come up with those additional ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, budgets can massively impact momentum. I think there will always be a bit of a stigma around money, and talking about money and are we doing the right thing with our money, and money this and money that, and it can be a real hamper on creativity, because I think there is always a pressure of, I'd really like to do things in a new way, I'd really like to suggest a new idea, or I'd really like to add in some additional value, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, because if it turns out that it costs more, who is that going to fall down on, and is that going to be, who's responsible for that, and is it going to be okay if I can prove the value of that thing is added? I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we would face, but also I think other marketing teams would face, and that then sort of stops them doing certain things, or
thinking outside the box a little bit.
Exactly that. And I think one of the great things that we do as a team is kind of discovery workshops, which is that upfront work of taking the time to all get together and have an ideation session, and to discover what it is that you're trying to do, what it is you're trying to achieve, but to kind of feed off of everyone's knowledge and everyone's expertise, and just be collaborative. Which I think it's a project that we all love doing, but from an expectation management point of view, it's very much remembering that has to be accounted for. That ideation session right at the beginning has to form part of the budget, and although it can feel like you're not really getting anywhere, and it's a long slog to have these workshops and to do the outcome reports, and before you even get anywhere, before you actually start your project, you're talking about the project, and putting budget to talking about something is really hard.
But so many of the great ideas come from those sessions. And having a number of brains together rather than just one thinking of it is just the beauty of why they work so well. Because everyone's sharing their ideas collectively and coming up with these great ideas for future reference points, really.
And the challenges are identified right at the beginning, and the risks might be identified right at the beginning. Everyone knows where they stand, everyone knows what their role is in the project. And although that initial upfront chat, if you like, all those upfront sort of groundwork might take time, and it might be frustrating because it feels slow, in the long run it's going to help your project so much more, and the budget that is put towards these projects is going to be so much tighter because of all that upfront planning that you did.
Exactly.
I think a really important factor as well in budget management is reporting, and whether that be reporting throughout a project. If it's a campaign, for example, you're kind of looking maybe weekly or monthly, but at the end of a project, it's having that clarity of how that campaign went.
Exactly. I think that there are so many different report types that you can have within managing a budget, and each of them will help in its own right. I think that looking at lessons logs, keeping a log of all of the lessons that you've learned throughout the project, all of the lessons that you've learned surrounding the budget. Costs of things might have increased since last year. You've noted it down. You've got a reference point to refer back to. I think looking at risk registers, making sure that all of the risks that you've looked at the start of the project before the budget has been burned through, noting those all down and making sure they're taken into account once you get to the end of the project, and having a point that you can re-look back retrospectively and have a look at how have we burnt through that pot of money? Where has it gone? What things have we learned from that, and what can we implement and utilise going forward? So I think all of those reports definitely contribute towards that. I think a super useful session that we hold is a retrospective internal meeting as well, looking at how the teams felt throughout the project, and how different opinions collaborated, and what went well, what didn't go well, how much budget did we burn through, did we go over, did we stay under. So having that open forum where everyone can have a little bit of a conversation about how they found the project ran and how they found the how we scored against the budget essentially, and having that open conversation for people to raise their questions and opinions as they wish.
And we do that internally and externally. So with the internal teams that actually worked on the projects, we do a retrospective to understand how we actually carried out the task and what went well and what didn't go well. But from external point of view as well, from the stakeholders that we operate for, we have that external retrospective as well in terms of, did they see the process as successful? Were they aware of all the budget creep? Did they understand, were their expectations managed, and do they understand that they may have had an impact in that budget potentially going wrong? But I guess the most important part to conclude from it is where things went wrong, what can we learn from that, and what can we do differently next time? Because even when things go wrong, there's no reason why next time that doesn't have to be the same situation.
Exactly, and having a plan for when you are going to come round to face that issue again, perhaps next year or the year after, that there is a solution in place that's already been thought about and optimised and bettered along the way. So I think all of those things will help pull together a little bit of a case for the following year's budget.
100%. And I mean, all of the learnings from reporting as well can help in the future get more budget. So especially for those teams where a marketing manager or some of the stakeholders that we work with might not be the people that own a budget. It might be that they've been allocated it, and higher up the chain there's a blocker, and they can't just have more money. Having those reports and having those retrospectives will help get more money next time. But also kind of educate and help build a case to get that budget. Because if there's a logical reason, if there's value that can be provided, and there's valuable learnings that have been made, then that budget can be allocated, and you can go with an informed kind of case to say, this didn't go well, or this went really, really well, we really want to do more of this, and we need more budget for that, and provide that ROI and give a bit more insight into that for the business. Because if you're working internally, or even within a marketing team internally, you're reporting to other people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that having organisation there to show that you've got things in place for next year, and you've got a plan for next year, even if you haven't used all of that budget up, worst case scenario, there's a plan there to show to upper management that you've got ideas for next year and how you are going to utilise the budget going forward from all the learnings that you have made and all the risks that you've seen happening throughout the previous year that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have seen this furry lady walking around our masterclass. Just wanted to take the moment to introduce Blue, who clearly really enjoyed our masterclass today. Thank you so much for watching. We will, as we mentioned before, we'll be providing a link to our brief in the description, where you will also find information about 2 of our other masterclasses all around strategy and automation.